Hi, welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm still Robert Winters.
So let's just finish up the...
Yeah, so before the break, we were talking a little bit about the broadband task force, some of the recommendations.
Which is called Dig Once.
Dig Once,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Right, we actually had Saul Tannenbaum on this program.
Yeah, and he's
a
a member of the task force.
And he was really
Yeah.
very vocal about this. He was really definitely one of the big pushes to make...
To even get this task force going.
Even
And
get
to,
going,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah. But as we say, there's cost implications, and how would you do it, and should the city have much financial exposure,
Right.
or what, you know?
Well, and you agree with, I said the last thing that Susan said was you have to control the pole and conduit, but do not get into the retail business. So basically the infrastructure, and then you find a good person to work with that you're gonna, and they have to market it and stuff, right?
Yeah, you know, over the past 15 years or something like that, there are a few things that I thought about in this regard. One was, well, when is Verizon going to come here with FiOS?
Yeah.
But that just doesn't really seem to be happening.
I think I don't know whether it's an infrastructure thing or whether they're close, but there's apparently a sliver of Cambridge that has FiOS. I don't know where it is, but it does not, no one's talking about it happening.
Yeah.
They're talking about RCN, they're talking about other stuff, but not that.
They used to talk about RCN quite a bit some years ago, but then they were in financial straits. Yeah.
Well, they do have it in Somerville and Brookline.
Yeah, but the thing is, they had that even before the RCN ran into financial problems.
All right.
So when they ran into financial problems, then there wasn't much hope that they were going to put themselves out there into some debt in order to build the necessary secondary infrastructure to make things happen.
Right.
My sense about why we don't see FiOS is that Verizon would actually then have to essentially build a parallel network without a whole lot of promise that they would be able to draw the customers
it's a whole
away.
different. It's not. It's copper. It's fiber is different than.
Yeah, they would have to be offering a much better product and possibly at a better price.
I don't think
one
they
or
have
the
the easement. I don't think they have the right. I don't know what you call it.
Well, if you grant them the contract, then I think that
Really?
they then you have to give them access. But the thing is, they won't be able to reuse other people's conduits and
Right. I think
pipes
they
and
just
wires
it's too
and
much of
whatever.
a mess.
That's right.
Yeah.
It would be a mess, and it would be very
Too expensive.
and so they're just not interested. So
Yeah.
for a while, I remember there was this thing. I forget what it was called. Maybe you heard it at the conference. It was. I volunteered to be one of the sites. So they had these little rooftop repeaters where I think some of the people affiliated with MIT were basically going to have like I don't know, I think it was more of an internet service, but it was before broadband was sort of prevalent.
Yeah.
And basically we're going to just get people who own buildings, we're going to volunteer.
Like a hotspot.
Yeah, and basically create these spots, and then signals would just get bounced from place to place, and you would cover it like a net over the whole city.
Okay.
But it never happened.
But what is the city's fiber? They have a fiber network in municipal buildings. How does that operate?
Well, but it's only
I know, but
connecting
how?
individual buildings.
What is it physically? I mean, how did they do that?
Wires.
But it's not cable. Is it Wi-Fi?
You know what I do remember is when we were doing the municipal election broadcast, I think in 2011.
Okay, not the last two.
Yeah, I think it was the first time they'd actually rigged things up in such a way so that we could do a live broadcast from the senior center.
Because they had the
they ran a line across the street to City Hall, which then went over to the school.
So you're saying,
department,
but it has to be Ethernet type. It's not Wi-Fi. It's not.
Yeah.
So it is still through a
I think in
wire.
previous years, what they do is they record a segment, run it across the street,
funny.
put it into a machine or something like that.
It's a certainly fascinating.
Great.
This whole net all the stuff that's happening.
Now, I was actually, and I asked people about this periodically, including Saul Tannenbaum, who knows a lot about this.
Yeah.
I said, what's the next technology we haven't quite anticipated?
That came up in this meeting. It says that
Yeah.
you can't get fixed on something so completely when you don't know what's coming out.
Yeah, so you see, so that's what I thought might happen. The city goes and invests $180 million into infrastructure, and then 1 year later, somebody said, we've decided on this perfect way of using ultraviolet communication.
Yeah,
I'm making that up.
I think if that came up, how that came up.
And it's going to provide everything, infinite bandwidth, and all those wires you guys just paid for all as 100 million. You could just tear them out. They're good for nothing.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of scenario I worry about.
But Stockholm they formed a municipal corporation in order to do all this stuff.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
guess
the only
there's
way to
definitely
really
avenues to do all this
you have
the
to kind
right
of
way,
create
but-
kind of a side entity no matter
Exactly.
what.
It has to be quasi.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
with enough control so that they can't then
Yeah.
just sort of, do something bad.
Oh, important to be ahead of the technology. That's, I don't know who said it, but
Yeah.
maybe it was Saul that said it.
Yeah.
But that's the tricky part.
But see, that's the thing when you get like a city
Yeah.
involved, you think you're ahead until somebody comes up with something, you realize you're way behind.
Except that the one thing that was a constant was this idea of getting these empty pipes, getting it out, because that's never,
Yeah,
that's the best way to do
Yeah,
it, is what,
and that's a general
she said.
good principle.
Yeah.
Certainly when the city of
Yeah.
Cambridge is redoing a whole street,
always should be
They-
laying these.
they bring in all the
Pipes.
utilities, try and get everybody
Do you
to
think
do all
that's
this stuff at
happening? Do you
once.
think all these streets
Well,
that are
I
getting
th-
big pipe for this stuff?
I don't know about big pipe, but the thing is that
Whatever that means.
I seem to recall they were putting in some unused conduit in anticipation of things. But
Okay.
how are they anticipating enough? Maybe if they were,
When you say unused conduit, is it copper?
no,
Isn't
just
that-
conduit is just pipe, it's just actual pipe,
Oh,
and then
okay.
you pull the lines through it.
Okay, so this, I guess
You could pull
copper is-
fiber optics through it, you could pull copper through it. Yeah. You
So
could-
fiber optic is not
Yeah,
copper?
yeah.
Isn't it the same thing?
No.
No?
No.
Well, fiber is supposed to be
Like-
better than
it's like fiberglass
copper, I
or
guess.
So, but anyway, the thing is, you create the essentially the
create
pipes to pull the lines
the
through.
vessel.
The vessel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I
So-
hope we're doing that, because that's,
So I think there are some people, including at least one city council, who are pretty hot to trot to at least pursue this.
Yeah.
So it's not going to go away right away, but we'll
Right.
see. We'll have to see about how the
I guess,
viability shakes
I
out.
guess the committee was it, I guess it was brought by the neighborhood that long.
Yeah. Well, it was Councilor Mazin, I think.
He led that, and Carlone was there, Devereaux, and Mark McGovern, yeah.
I mean, everybody wants to provide, services, and if you're a city councilor, people remember you for that too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's not a bad thing to advocate. But on the other hand, they may also remember if you basically put the city into debt too. So,
Well, this Lee Giannetti, which I guess that's the head of the cable office? Okay.
No, communications
Head of
director.
cable office says, no?
Well, maybe.
I think they were the person, they responded to my thing about why there was
Yeah.
no, anyway, he said
Yeah.
90% of cost is digging up the road for conduit.
Yeah. Anyway, it's coming. So anyway, that was one thing recently.
And then right after
Much
that,
more recently, like yesterday, we were both at City Council
roundtable
meeting.
in lieu of a city council meeting.
Right, and it was the topic du jour
Yeah.
was charter schools.
Which I think was brought about by Mayor Simmons.
I was thinking back about this because I know that
It
it
had
was
a different topic originally, right?
Councilor Kelly was promoting the idea of having a roundtable or something with charter schools because I think
Okay,
he was very
yeah.
critical of the sort of disparities between how charter schools operate, how they have a big drop-off rate or something, and and so it was a little contentious. In fact, even leading to a couple of weeks ago, Councilor Devereaux wanting to have this roundtable meeting on charter schools turned into a regular meeting just to ditch it entirely. That did not have the votes, so in fact the meeting proceeded. But when the agenda came out, the agenda was not exactly what I expected, but it was it had major topics like addressing and uncovering strategies.
I didn't see that
for the,
complete agenda. Where did you get such a complete
I just printed
agenda?
it off
I
the
just saw
city
the
website.
headings. I didn't see any of this other
Yeah,
stuff.
to address achievement gap, cultivating a Cambridge collective. This is very collaborative in tone. So any notion that this was sort of like a, evil charter schools versus
Well, it was actually
dreadful
mostly
public
the
schools.
charter schools that were there.
Yeah, and then it was some topics like community, school, climate, and culture, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting because some people certainly are viewing this and lumping it together with the Question 2 campaign statewide.
Right.
When I got to the meeting, there were the No on 2 people with picketing and
outside?
with signs
See, I
out in
got there
front of
late.
City
I didn't see
Hall.
that.
Some of them were in the council chamber wearing their No on 2 buttons.
Right.
So there was pretty clearly a kind of a we don't like charter schools group
Right.
that were there. But I have to say
Yeah.
that of all the people, it was, there were city councilors, several school committee members.
But no teachers, no heads of.
Right. And
There
which-
was the woman next to Mayor Simmons, Carolyn Turk, is that her name?
Carolyn Turk was
Yeah.
up there, yeah.
So there are more administrative people and school committee people and city councilors.
Right.
But no either they weren't
teachers.
invited. Yeah,
Right.
I think they wanted this just to be a
Maybe
presentation
they'll do
by
something
charter
else,
schools.
but
Yeah.
so they had representatives from the Prospect Hill Academy, which actually has multiple levels, multiple campuses.
Yes.
And there's the the Community Charter School of Cambridge, CCSC,
Right.
which I think is housed in a building down East Cambridge, Bent Street. And they had who else?
Last
did they
one
have?
was the.
They had Benjamin Banneker Charter School,
which
which
was
is,
one of the first charters.
I
think,
believe,
in Cambridge.
yeah. I remember when they were organizing for that, and some of the people.
Prospect Hill actually was started. I remember years ago. I worked with someone whose kids lived in Revere, and they went to that school.
Yeah.
So they attract a lot of
Charter schools
kids
can take people from wherever.
Right, but Prospect Hill, I think, also didn't have as many Cambridge kids initially as it. Whereas Benjamin Banneker was based.
It was very much
But
Cambridge
anyway,
centric.
so
Though not exclusive.
so
but
you
much
you
so.
were there. Did the,
Yeah.
and,
So a lot of administrative people, and they
Yeah.
were sort of basically telling their story.
and a parent and / administrator, which is interesting.
Yeah, actually, one person who's administrator with the Banneker also has a child in the Community Charter School of
Right.
Cambridge, I believe.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what made this sort of interesting and potentially conflictive, that's not a real word, is it? Conflictive? Now it is. I love
They
the
make
English
so many
language.
words up now.
Yeah.
Incentivize. I mean,
It's, yeah, there we go, right? So I thought, because I know that school committee member Patty Nolan
Yes.
and City Councilor Jan Devereaux
Had written
are
a column.
pretty much straight out saying,
Right.
we like charter schools
Right.
and don't diss them, and we're in favor of this
that was a letter
ballot
to the
question.
ed. I think that's on your Civic Journal somewhere.
Right.
You cite-
Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, there were people like Mayor Simmons, Mark McGovern, Craig Kelly, Tim Toomey, Kathleen Kelly, Richard Harding, Fred Fantini. So that's quite a few city council and
But
school
did they
committee
also?
members.
I didn't hear any of them speak that much about that.
No, but the thing is, they put a letter in posing
Oh.
question 2 in the Cambridge Chronicle
When was that?
prior to the letter that came from
Oh, okay. So theirs was almost
Patty
a
Nolan
response
and
to that.
Jan Devereaux. I would say it would be a
All
response.
right. I
Right.
see.
So people are taking sides, but
Yes.
more people in the kind of amongst elected officials are sort of taking the no on to
Oh,
stance.
well, the school committee voted to say no.
Right.
They were one of the many.
Right.
school
And
committee
Patty
around
Nolan's
the
being
state.
outspokenly the other
Right.
in that regard.
Well, she was out. Voted.
Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't know quite what to expect, and I hadn't really looked at the agenda in advance. So I'm at the meeting and just sort of taking it in, and I'm just going to say straight away, I thought the representatives, the administrative representatives from the charter schools, were incredibly impressive, actually,
They were
in
very
what they were
impressive.
saying.
Yes.
And I would think, unless somebody just was completely closed-minded about it, there was. I just cannot imagine anybody walking away from this meeting without becoming at least a little more welcoming, accepting, and at least open-minded about these
Yes.
charter schools. There was one woman in particular, I forget her name, was it Emma
Emma was her
Stillman
first
or
name.
something?
Yeah. She's
Who
at
actually
the,
was getting pretty
Prospect
emotional
Hill.
about it. She was saying
She
like,
was one of the last speakers, and I think she
Yeah.
touched everybody.
yeah, and basically making the point that, people think
Yeah.
that this is just sort of benign statements when they start, ganging up on the
Yeah,
charter
but they
schools.
take it very personally. They have felt they've wanted to reach out, and they're
Yeah.
always rejected.
Yeah.
That was the feeling I got.
Yes.
They're turned.
Yes, and there
they're
was
not
another
given
person.
any cooperation from the public schools.
Yeah, one other person, a gentleman there from one of the other schools, expressed the same sentiment. Now, it's one thing to take sides on the question 2, whether you should lift the cap or not
Right.
on charter schools to allow more, but
In designated areas, we should be
In
specific
designated
about
areas.
12 a year in identified low
right.
income.
So that's a totally reasonable question. People can have different points of view on it, but I think there was definitely a perception, and I have to say, I see it. I see it all the time, where people
Yeah.
are just beating up on charter schools just because they're not public school. Well, they are public schools.
They are public
But-
schools, and they take away funds.
Right.
But
And-
I don't understand all of the funding stuff.
Yeah.
But
So again, it would be nice to hear from the teachers as well, but I certainly got the impression that every single one of the administrative people who were there were incredibly dedicated people
Yes.
who wanted to just do the best thing for children.
and some of them had worked in the Cambridge schools.
Some had
or
histories
they were
within the
regular-
public school
yeah.
system, and there were tales of people just working on their own dime, not
Yeah.
even being paid, staying late into the evening, working because they just wanted to do right by the kids. And I was really touched by the whole presentation.
Now, was it the two? I don't know about the Prospect Hill, but I think the Cambridge, the what is it, Community Cambridge Charter?
Community Charter
And
School
Benjamin
of
Banneker,
Cambridge.
are they both highly African-American?
Well, see, that's another thing too. Is that
I heard the
if I didn't know anything
Yeah.
at all about this, I would have just sort of assumed that the way charter schools work is that people wanting like refugees from a public school system, which are in urban districts are often a high percentage minority students, that they would be sort of finding refuge, so to speak, in charter schools, so that you would actually end up with a higher percentage of white students in those. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. The primary clients of the charter schools are African American.
I don't know
or
about
persons
Prospect
of
Hill,
color.
but certainly.
Well, the percentages they were talking about, and I actually,
Well, this was-
I've actually visited Prospect Hill Academy at
Yeah.
an invitation from Alan Stein at one time.
When was
And
this?
it is maybe 5 years ago. It could
a long
have
time
been
ago.
more recent, actually.
Because they've grown since then, too.
Yeah, and I still get some updates via email from them, and it was predominantly persons of color, and the percentages what we were hearing are it's sort of like 75%, 80-something%, and upward. Right. In fact, it was there was one point I think we were commenting on it where after I think it was one of the other members of the school committee actually was referring to the Cambridge public school system
Being
and
more
saying,
diverse.
well, we have challenges because we're a more diverse system.
We had,
I think
white kids and other kids.
yeah, it was the first time I'd actually
Yeah.
heard things spun the opposite way.
It's
I think
true.
where. It was like diverse, meaning we were
You're dealing with
had a higher
many more
percentage
different
of white-
kinds of
white
groups.
children.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought it was interesting, and I have
Yeah.
to say, I really do hope
I think it
that
opens some doors. I think, and again, I don't know all the nitty gritty about whether some of the refusal to work together is to do with intramural sports or what, because obviously.
right, there are some structural problems.
Yeah.
If you're in a charter school, but you
Right.
also want to play soccer
Yes.
or on a football team,
Right.
You might not have access to play
Right.
because
And I don't know if there's any rules about that, or
I don't
and I don't
know,
know if that's
but
what they're referring to. I think it
I-
was a broader issue of, look, we're here, we exist, why can't we work together?
And I think
And I-
I think Mayor Simmons
Yeah.
was at her best in definitely
Yeah.
trying to open some of those doors.
I think some doors got open, and somebody
Yeah.
mentioned that some teachers are working with other principals.
If you
there
think
was some
about
meeting
it,
going on once a
But
month.
intramural
so, yeah.
sports is something that's
Yeah.
done basically after school. So both schools are out.
Except, well, that's not true because
Right.
the charter schools have a longer school day,
They do have a longer school
and that
day.
does interfere with sports.
It might, yeah.
It does.
might.
It's not.
But if it
Yeah.
were the case
Yeah.
that there was no interference, it
Yeah.
seems to me
Yeah.
that there shouldn't really be a restriction. Now, on the other hand, if people just treat them like totally separate entities, like, well, sorry, Matignon High School students can't play for Cambridge Regional Latin High School students.
Yeah, but to me they're not
but they're
separated
not-
because it's
one's
not public
parochial
money.
and this
one's
is public
right.
schools.
It's. I mean,
So-
I mean, again, I am not at all.
They should look into
This is
this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know more. If I had a kid in school now, I would know more. But it wasn't an issue for me. But
Yeah.
I think that it was very compelling, and Cambridge may not be representative of the kind of charter schools that are popping up in a lot of places that people do complain about, which is
Well,
true.
one-
Where it's become a big moneymaker for hedge funds, because I've seen
Yeah.
some nationally
Yeah.
movies on this, and
Yeah.
it is true.
Yeah.
Oh, let's get into this business because we can make money.
Yeah.
And that is a
I don't
drawback
think that's the
to it.
rule around the Massachusetts systems, but I don't know
Well, at
enough
least
about
not
it.
around Cambridge.
I'd like
but,
to learn a little bit more. That's
there's
why
a
I'm
lot
not
of
early
private
voting yet.
entities.
I'm going to look into
I know.
question 2
I
a little
know.
bit more,
All
I
right.
think.
What about
But-
the other questions?
Well, that's another matter.
Well, where is that at, by the way, on Cambridge with the whole medical marijuana, the zoning? I'm so confused by that.
That's still sort of open to
They can't
discussion.
even decide that. I mean, do we even have an operating
All
store
right,
yet?
No, but the zoning's been
It's
approved.
been 3 years. This law was passed 3 years ago.
I can't think of a single reason why
Boston has stores.
why the medical marijuana dispensaries couldn't be opening up because they've got their zoning in place.
Well, that's what makes me think. And now
Well,
we're
there may
going
be
to
some
vote
other
on.
little regulatory
I
hurdle.
don't.
I'm not
yeah,
sure.
but it seems to be just
But-
our city.
But certainly the absurd thing that's been happening is the way in which potential people running these new medical marijuana dispensaries had to seek zoning relief to change zoning districts to permit uses in zones other than the ones that were originally laid out. And they did it so whenever somebody says, well, I want to run one on Mass Ave between Central Square and Harvard Square. So in comes a zoning petition. Another one says, well, we want to open one in Harvard Square. In comes a zoning petition.
Why couldn't have done the other way around? Like, okay, we're going to identify 3 areas in the city
They
where
did
you
that.
can and
That's what they did first.
and what happened?
And it was in sort of North Point area and
Yeah.
out around West Cambridge,
Yeah.
north of Fresh Pond in the quadrangle area.
Okay.
Well, they didn't want to do it. And
Who's
then, the people who were going to run the dispensaries. And there was, and I'm not an expert in this,
Yeah.
there was also a change from the legislature in terms of this, what could be cited in terms of limits of some sort. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
So there was some reasons, I think.
And there was no central, because now we have something around Ellery, right?
So here's the way I think. So and then when people would talk, I certainly speculated and said, well, maybe this is all premature discussion, because if this I even say this a year ago. I said if the ballot question about legalizing recreational marijuana goes through, won't all this be moot? And I have been told many times over, including by several city councilors, one in particular, I'm not going to name, says, well, these are totally separate. Well, guess what, folks?
They can share the same space, I heard.
Yeah, you do a little split here. Maybe there's a little bit of internal separation.
To me, it makes sense you would want to have them not spread out everywhere.
I said at the time that I wondered whether the reasons why people were wanting to open up medical marijuana dispensaries in certain neighborhoods that were not part of the districts was because they were looking ahead to the day when they would become recreational. And then I got shot down by one local lawyer guy who's very politically connected, and one city councilor said, oh, no, these are totally separate things. They're not totally separate things.
But is it up to the municipality whether they want to keep them together? I mean, they can also have a vote in the city to say we're not going to have any.
Well, of course, the 800-pound gorilla here is the state legislature. The governor is not a fan of
neither
question
is Attorney
4.
General.
Neither is the Senate president.
Right.
And I heard him on TV over the weekend coming straight out and say if question 4 passes, he's going to sort of do everything in his power to regulate it, to contain it to whatever degree is possible. Still respecting the will of the voters, but making sure that any of the potential negative consequences that at least he perceives will not.
But the way the language also allows for each municipality to take some.
Right.
Although I think they have to run a vote. It could take a little.
But on the other hand, let's just say also that I think that just even with the medical marijuana dispensaries, as well as I'm presuming the recreational ones, should this pass, their city council has pending now. It's actually in the pipeline for zoning amendments.
That's what I was wondering.
And it may get delayed a little bit, but they basically want to change this to, instead of doing a little zoning change here, a little zoning change here, they're going to basically, they're going to kind of recraft some aspects of the zoning code anyway. And adjust the use tables to just say, look, you can do it's a allowable use in a certain zone. It's an allowable use here.
So that's the planning department is doing that.
The community development department and the planning board.
Come up with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's in the queue yet, but soon there will be ordinance committee hearings, as well as planning board hearings. I imagine none of them will happen until after Election Day, because honestly, you better find out what's coming first. Otherwise, it would be kind of a waste of time, I'd say. So another thing I thought at least was worthy of at least a few minutes of mention here is that a process that began, we mentioned actually the first hour briefly, was about this Municipal Lighting Ordinance.
Yeah, I know nothing.
I'll just say a few things about it because, to me, there's some good ideas and there's some silliness about it. This grew out of what was called the Teague petition several years ago, which originally wanted to change the zoning to basically put real strong restrictions on outdoor lighting, mainly the type that kind of comes glaring in your bedroom window, that kind of stuff. But it would only have applied to new construction. So I spoke at the time and said there should be a municipal ordinance, and this should not be part of zoning. It should just be, what's allowed just under the law. And that's what has happened.
Oh, so
a proposal's out there.
You made a difference there?
I wasn't the only one. I think the planning board kind of saw it that way too.
This was a few years ago?
Yeah, this has been dragged out for quite some time. So now there's a proposed ordinance that address those original aspects. But, and the original person, who's Charles Teague, was never a fan of what was coming out.
Right.
So now there's this campaign going on about.
But wait, wasn't there a
evil lighting.
task force formed to?
Yeah, the task force came up with the.
consultant?
Well, the task force came up with the proposal, which is now before the city council.
Oh, okay, they didn't have a
Yeah.
separate consultant?
But in the meantime, a lot of people got pretty bothered by things like this lighting on some buildings called like the Zinc apartment buildings over in the
Yeah.
North Point areas.
Yeah,
So then now the question is, well, will this municipal ordinance apply to those kinds of buildings? Well, not so clear that it would, because honestly, seeing a light you don't like on a
Yeah.
building quarter mile away is not the same as somebody shining a spotlight into your bedroom window.
right.
Right? They're different things. Yet I'm on all these
Yeah.
email lists, I'm getting every day multiple
Yeah.
ones here about, stop horrible lighting, but it's largely based on aesthetics
Yeah.
as opposed to intrusion.
Well, have you read this whole, the language, and
I've
does
read
it
the-
cover those areas?
I'm not 100% sure, but I know that there's a movement now to try and bring in sort of, we don't like the look of that bright lighting on that building that way over there, and have that somehow be incorporated into a municipal ordinance. On the other hand, it may just basically get changed in the zoning, because there's actually 2 hearings happening on the 27th, which is 2 days from now. One about the municipal ordinance aspects and the other on the zoning ordinance aspects. I'm not going to go into details because we only got
No.
half a minute here,
Yeah.
but I think there's a lot of misinformation being thrown out there. And, I think we'd all be well off if we would at least just address the problem of the glaring windows, the glaring light, shining into
Yeah.
your bedroom windows.
Yeah.
And maybe we can think a little bit more on the other stuff.
Yeah,
So
good.
anyway, it looks like we're out of time.
Okay.
So I
So
suppose
next
we'll be
week
back.
is November 1st, okay.
Yeah. And anyway, don't forget to vote.
Yeah.